The Watchtower, and Awake are the two flagship publications of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization, with a combined printing of over 100 million copies a month in more than 300 languages. But behind their serene religious exterior, many experts label these publications as the primary tool of thought control, subtly creeping into the spiritual, psychological, and social lives of its followers. Founded in the late 19th century by Charles Taze Russell, the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses reject the Trinity, forbid blood transfusions, and refuse military service, saluting the national flag and celebrating birthdays and major holidays. What's most controversial, however, is how the organization isolates its members from the outside world. Within the community, reading non-official books is considered poisonous spiritual food. Members are instructed to trust the Watchtower as the sole source of truth. Even higher education is often discouraged on the grounds that it could lead members away from the faith. Furthermore, the organization enforces a system of shunning or social ostracism against anyone who leaves or questions the teachings, even their own family members. Labeled apostates, they are not to be spoken to. This excommunication has led to widespread psychological trauma and even suicide. In 2017, Russia officially banned Jehovah's Witnesses, classifying it as an extremist organization. Human rights activists have voiced alarm over the systematic level of indoctrination and emotional manipulation, for which the Watchtower serves as a religiously packaged roadmap for brainwashing. Dianetics. L. Ron Hubbard's book Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health, published in 1950, is the cornerstone of the Church of Scientology, a controversial religious movement often accused of being a brainwashing cult. Hubbard, a science fiction writer, claimed to have discovered a scientific method to cure psychological trauma by erasing engrams, or subconscious memories that shape human emotional and physical reactions. This process, called auditing, involves an individual being asked a series of questions while holding a device called an e-meter, which supposedly reads mental fluctuations. On the surface, Dianetics promises psychological liberation and enhanced spiritual abilities. In practice, however, many former Scientologists report extreme mental manipulation and emotional and financial control. Individuals who enter the auditing system often spend thousands of dollars to ascend to higher levels of awareness, known as the operating thetan levels, which the Church presents as the path to spiritual perfection. Scientology is also notorious for its aggressive tactics in silencing critics through legal intimidation, surveillance, and its fair game policy, which permits the harassment of the Church's enemies. Moreover, members are forbidden from reading outside criticism and are pressured to cut ties with family who don't support the teachings. In various countries, the Scientology is considered a dangerous organization. Germany refused to recognize it as a religion, and a French court found its local branch guilty of fraud. Dianetics isn't just a book, it's the gateway to a belief system that has been systematically accused of brainwashing. The Final Call. The Final Call is the official newspaper of the Nation of Islam, NOI, a religious and political organization founded in the United States in the 1930s. Although it claims to be based on Islam, NOI's teachings deviate sharply from mainstream Islam, blending racial theology, conspiracy theories, and black nationalism. Under the leadership of Louis Farrakhan since 1977, The Final Call has become the primary vehicle for spreading their ideology, which many consider to be manipulative, sectarian, and even racist. Its publications often feature narratives that white people are devils, as taught by founder Elijah Muhammad, that the Holocaust has been exaggerated, and various anti-Semitic and anti-government conspiracy theories. Farrakhan himself once called Hitler a very great man, sparking widespread condemnation. The paper is sold on a massive scale by NOI members, known as the Fruit of Islam, on the streets of major cities. Members are encouraged to consume information only from internal sources and maintain total loyalty to Farrakhan as their spiritual and political leader. Critics argue that the Final Call is not just ideological propaganda, but is also used to brainwash young black Americans through a rhetoric of division, supremacy, and leader worship. Former members have also reported strict social control, a spiritual caste system, and a rejection of outside education that doesn't align with the group's teachings. The Little Red Book, quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong, better known as the Little Red Book, isn't a religious text in the traditional sense. But during China's Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976, it was worshipped like a holy book by millions. Under Mao Zedong's leadership, the Chinese Communist Party created an extreme cult of personality. The book, a collection of Mao's quotes on politics, morality, war, and Marxist-Leninist ideology, became the only text that every citizen was required to own, read, and memorize. Its use was enforced by the Red Guards, fanatical youth groups given full authority to attack anyone deemed counter-revolutionary or bourgeois. They forced teachers, parents, and officials to publicly recite from the Little Red Book and practice Mao's teachings as a display of ideological loyalty. Anyone who failed to comply could be imprisoned, exiled, tortured, or even killed. The book became one of the largest mass brainwashing tools in modern history, creating a generation that was isolated from the outside world and completely subservient to state ideology. Much like a religious text, Mao was positioned as a messianic figure, and his every quote was treated as absolute truth. Even everyday conversations had to be aligned with the book's content. Though overtly political, the Little Red Book forged a dogmatic and fanatical mindset. Its impact is still felt in the social and psychological fabric of Chinese society today. The 12 Tribes. The 12 Tribes is a controversial religious movement that emerged in the early 1970s in Tennessee, led by Elbert Eugene Spriggs. The movement presents itself as a community dedicated to restoring the pure communal lifestyle of the first Christians, but behind this peaceful image, their internal teachings and doctrines are tightly controlled and have been accused of brainwashing followers. The group's books and internal pamphlets, which are not sold publicly, contain exclusive scriptural interpretations, a patriarchal social structure, and a rejection of modern education and government. Members are required to live communally, surrender all personal property, and cut ties with the outside world, including their families. They do not permit formal education for children, replacing it with the group's highly selective teachings. The community's system of spiritual discipline includes the physical punishment of children and mental training from a young age to ensure obedience to the spiritual hierarchy. They publish various books and flyers with titles like The Three Eternal Destinies of Man and Critical Issues, which claim that only their group understands God's true plan. Authorities in Germany and Australia have raided 12 tribes communities over allegations of child abuse and human rights violations. Many former members report psychological trauma, total control over their personal lives, and a prohibition on critical thinking, making its teachings a textbook example of systematic religious brainwashing. Children of God, later renamed the Family International, was one of the 20th century's most controversial movements. Founded by David Berg in the late 1960s, the group blended Christian mysticism with extreme interpersonal manipulation justified through their internal doctrines, chiefly through secret publications known as the Mo Letters. Berg wrote over 3,000 of these letters to his followers, containing a harmful mix of spiritual teachings, end times prophecies, and guidance on intimate relationships twisted from Bible verses. In the Mo Letters, Berg introduced the concept of flirty fishing, the use of intimacy as a recruitment tool, a practice that later led to thousands of cases of severe exploitation and mistreatment, which also affected its youngest members. His followers were trained to obey every command from their leader without question. Parents were often separated from their children, who were then raised in a closed educational system built on spiritual indoctrination. Younger members were taught not only to worship God, but to idolize Berg as a prophetic figure. They were denied access to outside education, mainstream books, or alternative viewpoints. Many former members have reported deep trauma from severe mistreatment, acts of physical harm, and the apocalyptic doctrines instilled in them from a young age. Although the organization has since publicly reformed, the legacy of the Mo Letters remains the written proof of a system of spiritual and psychological brainwashing polished with religious language. The Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon, published in 1830 by Joseph Smith, is a central holy text of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS, widely known as the Mormon Church. Smith claimed he received a revelation from an angel named Moroni and translated ancient writings from golden plates using seer stones called the Urim and Thummim. The book contains a complex narrative about ancient peoples in the Americas, supposedly descendants of Israelites, complete with a story of Jesus appearing in the New World. While it seems like a supplementary scripture, the Book of Mormon created an exclusive belief system, claiming that all other churches had fallen into apostasy and that only the Mormon Church possessed true divine authority. Its highly hierarchical organizational structure and tightly controlled social system led many to view early Mormonism as a religious cult that brainwashed its followers. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, the church demanded absolute loyalty to its prophet and doctrines, including controversial practices like polygamy. Followers lived in closed communities, with many leaving their former lives behind to join. They were taught to avoid outside literature, dedicate themselves to missionary work, and follow the modern revelations of church leaders without question. Though more moderate today, many ex-Mormons still report psychological pressure, social surveillance, and being isolated by their families if they leave the church, making the Book of Mormon not just a sacred text, but the ideological and identity-defining control center of a totalistic faith. Unification Church teachings. The Unification Church, founded by Sun Myung Moon in South Korea in 1954, claims to be the restoration of a broken Christianity. Its core doctrines are laid out in the book Divine Principle, as well as an internal text taught rigorously through intensive seminars and spiritual training. Moon declared himself the second Messiah, chosen to complete the mission that Jesus failed to finish due to his crucifixion. This teaching spread rapidly around the world, but it also drew serious accusations of being a brainwashing system disguised in a cloak of divine love and spiritual unity. One of the Unification Church's main tactics is layered indoctrination through multi-day retreat seminars, where participants' communication is restricted and they are subjected to repetitive lectures until they reach a state of mental exhaustion, a classic mind control technique. The movement is also famous for its mass weddings, where Moon would match couples who barely knew each other based on his divine insight. Followers were expected to give up their free will and surrender life choices to the church's authority structure. Ex-members report emotional pressure, extreme financial demands, and being forced to sever ties with non-believing family members. They were also required to hand over their personal assets to support Moon's global mission. International critics have called its teachings a form of conditional love. If you're loyal, you're promised a place in heaven. If you dissent, you lose everything, including your community and your identity. The holy texts of Aum Shinrikyo. Aum Shinrikyo, founded by Shoko Asahara in Japan in 1984, is one of the most extreme examples of a religious teaching that culminated in deadly and systematic brainwashing. The doomsday cult blended elements of Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, and Western occultism, all compiled into a collection of holy texts written and interpreted solely by Asahara. He declared himself to be both the Christ of Japan and the Maitreya Buddha, the final spiritual leader before the end of times. These teachings prepared his followers to face Armageddon, positioning Aum as the sole savior of humanity. Aum Shinrikyo's primary texts, like The Supreme Truth, depicted the world as an evil place dominated by demonic materialism and taught that only through total loyalty to Asahara could one achieve enlightenment. They also taught that killing non-believers was a righteous act that would save their souls from a painful cycle of rebirth. This doctrine became the justification for horrific acts, including the 1995 sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway that killed 13 people and injured thousands. Inside the community, members were forced to undergo harsh purification rituals, including consuming chemical substances, undergoing mental isolation, and witnessing violence. Many of them were highly educated graduates of top universities who were radicalized through gradual indoctrination techniques, starting with meditation, then surrendering their money, and finally submitting completely to Asahara's revelations. These teachings didn't just brainwash people, they erased their humanity for the sake of a guru's absolute power.